with the Trudeau government, I'm being polite here, but a lot of people were just frankly nervous all the time because we didn't know what was going to happen. And frankly, we had a government that just didn't understand supply chain economics at all. Decisions that were made were incredibly dangerous for our economy.
Tax his land, tax his bed, tax the table at which he's fed. Tax his tractor, tax his mule, teach him taxes are the rule. Tax his work, tax his pay, he works for peanuts anyway. Tax his car, tax his gas, find other ways to tax his. Tax all he has and let him know that you won't be done until he has no dough. I'm Franco Terrazzano. We've got a great show for you today. That was part of a poem from the Adam Smith Institute because we're going to be talking about the biggest culprit of inflation, the government. And we've got the food professor coming on the show to talk about the different government taxes and regulations that make your grocery haul more expensive. Then Kris Sims joins the show. It's Clips with Kris to go over the big taxpayer news that you don't want to miss. But first, grab your paycheck, rip it in half. That half is the taxman's. Now, do you know what the biggest expense is for the average Canadian family? It's not your home. It's not the clothes that you buy for your kids. It's not even the food that you get at the grocery store. It's taxes. All the taxes that you paid, all the different levels of government, 40% plus of your average family's budget is going to taxes, okay? So to put that into perspective, the average Canadian family pays more than 40% of their budget in taxes, okay? So the average Canadian family is spending more money on taxes than what they spend on clothing, food, and housing combined. Let that sink in. It's a good bet that your family's biggest expense is taxes. Now look, the best, the fastest, the easiest way for governments and politicians to make all areas of life more affordable is just to stop taking so much money in the first place. Then there's the taxes that directly increase prices, right? So think of carbon taxes. They directly make driving to work more expensive. Carbon taxes make buying food more expensive, and carbon taxes make heating your home more expensive. But perhaps the worst tax of them all is the inflation tax. The more dollars the government prints, the less that your dollars buy. Now, through the Bank of Canada, the central bank, the federal government prints new dollars out of thin air when it buys a financial asset like government debt. Okay, so the government can print new dollars out of thin air with a click of a keypad, but you can't print up new farmland, gasoline, or groceries. And during the heart of the pandemic, the Bank of Canada printed up more than $300 billion out of thin air and dropped that new cash into the Canadian economy, which was going through revolving government lockdowns for years. So government created the perfect storm for inflation, right? The government printed up a bunch of new money out of thin air, and the government made it harder to produce the stuff that money buys, right? There were too many dollars chasing too few goods, and you're paying for their inflation tax. And speaking of what you're paying for, I mean, groceries, the cost of groceries are through the roof. And coming up right now, we've got the food professor, okay? Sylvain Charlebois coming on the show to talk about all the different government taxes and regulations that make your grocery haul more expensive. Well, folks, I'm really excited for our guest on the show today, Dr. Sylvain Charlebois. Now, you probably know him, as I used to know him, as the food professor. Right? So he's a professor and director of Agri-Food Analytics Lab at Dalhousie University and also a visiting scholar at McGill. But really how I came to know him, following him on social media, is just he's my go-to source whenever I want to know what's going on with food prices and really what governments are doing to make food more expensive here in Canada. So I think it's a perfect time to have the food professor on the show right before Thanksgiving. Professor, thanks for coming on the show today.
Oh, my pleasure.
Well, let's just get right into the first question, right? The cost of food has exploded in recent years. Anyone who's gone to the grocery store recently, so essentially everyone, maybe except for the Prime Minister, knows that food is extremely, extremely expensive still. So what has government done through taxes and regulations that drives up the price of food?
I mean, there are things that really no one can control, like climate has actually impacted the price for many products. But in terms of government and policy, obviously, there are there are several decisions that have been made by Ottawa that actually has directly impacted food prices. And let's start, of course, with the GST holiday. I did testify before Senate against it. I thought it was a bad idea. Getting rid of taxes is a good idea, but getting rid of them temporarily is the worst of ideas because you basically open up the door to opportunistic pricing. Typically, like when Stephen Harper decided to reduce the GST by 1% twice over 18 months, well, basically, the food industry just went after that 1% or that 2%, basically. That's kind of what happened. So he basically pushed prices higher in both retail and food service. The other factor, of course, is the carbon tax. We are very concerned about the carbon tax, the industrial carbon tax, which remains. You can see that the industrial food prices in Canada are increasing way more than industrial food prices in the United States, where there is no federal carbon tax there. So that's putting a lot more pressure on grocers. Does it impact retail prices? Well, not necessarily, but it does impact our industry's competitiveness, which eventually could impact our food security. Mm-hmm. So that's why we've always been concerned about that. And in terms of counter tariffs, of course, we have discovered recently that Canada was in breach of CUSMA. We were tariffing a lot of products and nobody was talking about it until the U.S. ambassador to Canada, basically kind of mentioned it. And all of a sudden, basically, Prime Minister Carney decided to get rid of most, if not all, counter tariffs impacting food prices. So as a result, we have seen the price of many products like oranges, coffee, tea, dried pasta, sauces. I mean, there were hundreds and hundreds of food products that were impacted by counter tariffs, which really has skewed the CPI. So that's why right now our food inflation rate is at 3.4%, which is actually much higher than the United States.
Well, a lot to chew on there, and I'd kind of like to go into a little bit more detail on some of the stuff that you talked about. And I'm glad you brought up carbon taxes. So let's start there. We've talked about carbon taxes a lot in the past at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Right now, watching the House of Commons, it's almost like you see Prime Minister Mark Carney, a lot of his MPs taking a victory lap on, canceling their consumer carbon tax. But, you mentioned that there's still an industrial carbon tax that is in place, right? A carbon tax on Canadian businesses. And I've also seen you write extensively on how carbon taxes throughout the supply chain impact Canadians. So I'm wondering if you can kind of go into a little bit more detail on how carbon taxes influence food prices.
Well, it's the compounding effect. I mean, you can do whatever you want with farmers and processors and give them credits. It still elevates the price for everything. And as these products get closer to the consumer, the carbon tax actually puts a lot more pressure and prices tend to go up. And this is something that I think is underappreciated by policymakers in Ottawa. And of course, now the move by Carney to get rid of the visible part of the carbon tax is a bit deceiving because we still are dealing with, in my view, with the worst part of the carbon tax for the food industry. And keep in mind, Franco, what's different with food versus other sectors, that margins are extremely low. There's lots of waste and you can't afford to really pay more. So that's certainly, I've always encouraged the carrot approach. I think the environment is an important issue and climate change is an important issue. And we need to green our economy because if we are to diversify our markets, like Europe, for example, we don't have much of a choice, but I've always preferred the carrot approach, incentivizing companies to become greener and not just punish polluters like we're doing right now.
Well, and I remember during the election campaign, right? Carney kind of made this statement like, oh, don't worry. It's only businesses that pay the industrial carbon tax. So we did some polling. We had Leger that showed that, well, only 9% of Canadians believe that it would just be businesses who pay the carbon tax, right? 70% of Canadians said, well, no, businesses are going to pass on most or some of the costs to Canadians. Of course, it trickles throughout the entire economy. Now, one thing that I heard you talk about was margins, right? And so I want to go back in time a little bit, where you had the former government, the Trudeau government, flirting with a grocery tax, right? A tax on grocery stores. Now, of course, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation,
But Franco, sorry to interrupt, but they weren't just flirting with the idea of taxing grocers. They were also thinking about freezing the price for 5,000 food staples in Canada, as France did last year or 2 years ago. So, I mean, they were flirting with some really drastic measures here.
No, you're right. No, I'm glad you brought that up. But they're essentially trying to say, well, inflation is because of these, business people. Like, that's why inflation is going on. So they're trying to put the blame on them. But can you just go into more detail? Like, what would this type of tax or those types of measures have done if they were imposed on Canadians? And maybe just talk about, some of the margins at grocery stores.
Well, so obviously, this is the windfall tax discussion is always been around. We see what's going on with banks, for example, where there is a windfall tax. I don't think banks are making less money, but who's paying for all that? You and I, basically. It's just margins are much higher with banking. In food, it'd be much, much worse because of margins. And for those who actually think that grocers are gouging, I mean, it's always possible for some verticals or some section of the grocery store. There could be some issues for sure. And right now, I'm certainly thinking about beef. There's something really wrong with beef. Because right now in Canada, we're buying Australian beef, and that beef is cheaper in Canada than Australian beef is in Australia. So there's a lot of stuff going on there. Now, putting that aside, I would say that if you look at our grocers' financial statements, I would look at two metrics. One, gross margins. Gross margins are a good indicator to assess whether there is profiteering going on. It's revenues minus the cost of goods. If that goes up, that's a problem. And when you look at Empire, Sobeys, Metro, and Loblaw, I think Loblaw had 2 quarters in the last 4 years where you saw a slight increase of the gross margin, but that's about it. So there was nothing to be alarmed with. The other metric that we watch very carefully is same-store food sales. If that's north of inflation, that becomes a problem. That could be an indication that perhaps there's some profiteering with food in particular. But the bottom line, Franco, is that these companies are well managed and they're diversified. They make a lot of money selling cosmetics, selling clothing, selling prescription drugs and things like that. That's really where the money is. And so that's why we need to be careful. And I saw an article this weekend in a Toronto Star, yet again, pointing fingers at grocers. Using terms like record profits is just so misleading because you're supposed to see companies making profits. If they don't make a profit, they disappear. But at the same time, you also want to make sure that they don't break the law, like what happened with bread, for example. So I can totally understand why people are still skeptical.
Yeah, and this is kind of more the CTF bag, right? But for the government doesn't need any more money. It doesn't have a revenue problem. It really has a spending problem, overspending for years and years. And I just worry that higher taxes.
For example, don't give $12 million to Loblaw.
Yeah, there you go. There you go, right? And the corporate welfare. But, those taxes, I always just worry and warn that it's really going to make life more expensive for Canadians. Speaking of taxes, let's get your thoughts on tariffs, right? Like, how is the tariffs, whether from President Trump or the counter tariffs, so the government of Canada's tariffs, how are those impacting food prices and Canadians?
Well, as you know, Franco, I'm on the road a lot. I meet companies, I meet CEOs. Last week I was in Toronto. This week I'm actually going to be in New Orleans,
Hmm.
talking with Americans, American investors. So I try to understand what's going on in Canada, but also try to understand how people see Canada from outside,
Yeah.
and it's not great. I mean, I would say, generally speaking, under with the Trudeau government. I'm being polite here, but a lot of people were just frankly nervous all the
Mm.
time because we didn't know what was going to happen, and frankly, we had a government that just didn't understand supply chain economics like at all. Decisions that were made were incredibly dangerous for our economy. With Mark Carney, it's a little different. I think that people are uh, remain patient. It's a wait and see sort of scenario. We haven't seen any results, but at least we haven't seen any major stupid decisions that could actually impact the costs of food at the grocery store or at the restaurant. I do believe that we have a prime minister realizing that the baggage that he inherited from the Trudeau years is incredibly difficult to manage, and so I get that. So, and I think a lot of industry folks do understand that as well. But there's not a whole lot of patience out there because geopolitics are incredibly complicated, and the review of CUSMA is just around the corner, and a lot of companies depend on a solid deal. So will we have a deal or not? That's the one thing that is still making some people nervous.
Yeah, and two questions. You speak about a level of anxiety. I know people are going to be probably a little anxious right now who are struggling, right? Because it's Thanksgiving. A lot of people are making some big grocery hauls. I know that you do some analysis on, how much Thanksgiving meals are costing Canadians. So I'm wondering if you can kind of talk about that study, are costs going up or down, and maybe you have some tips that the data shows that people can maybe save a little bit of money this year with their grocery haul.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this year, our analysis this year actually brought some good news. Generally speaking, if you look at, so we look at nine staples that you would typically see on a Thanksgiving dinner table. So obviously the bird, and we know that people actually will eat other things than just turkey, but turkey is the most popular one. Gravy, fillings, carrots, potatoes, pumpkin pie,
Oh yeah.
bread rolls, all these things. So we actually look at all of these things, and what we realized this year is that to buy all of these things compared to last year, you're paying an extra 0.2%. So it's not much. The bird is cheaper than last year. Last year, the industry was dealing with the avian flu. Um, and there are some things that are less expensive, like carrots, for example. Bread rolls are priced the same. Pumpkin pies are priced the same. But what's more expensive? Potatoes, more expensive. Also, we have um, anything in a can. So if you actually are accustomed to buy cranberries in a can, gravy in a can, I would stay away from those because you can see that the center of the store was highly impacted by counter tariffs, especially on steel and aluminum. So if
Right.
it's in a can, you're paying for those counter tariffs on both sides of the border. So, but other than that, it should be okay. A lot of people are opting for ham these days, and ham is a much cheaper solution for sure for Thanksgiving. But generally speaking, the situation is, I would say, under control compared to last year.
Okay, well that's good. And you said bread rolls. Now you're speaking my language. I love, the second day of Thanksgiving having those great sandwiches. So,
Absolutely.
I know you're a busy man. I'll let you go. Just one last question. What do you think governments should do to help make life a little bit more affordable?
Oh my goodness. When it comes to food security and food affordability, governments need to understand they need to stay out of the way as much as
Mm.
possible. And right now we're seeing one premier making a fool of himself in Doug Ford with the Crown Royal campaign against the maker of Crown Royal. I mean, you can tell he doesn't understand supply chain. He's pouring a bottle of Crown Royal that is actually made in Manitoba and Quebec. So as much as he has every right to be upset with a closing plan in Windsor, that plan has nothing to do with Crown Royal being made in Canada. The Crown Royal will continue to be made in Canada. So right now you're seeing a premier thinking about just plain bad policy, banning certain products at the LCBO, preventing consumers from having an actual choice. Let them decide if they want to boycott. So those are the kinds of things that I see that makes me scratch my head. And so stay out of the way, please, as much as possible, and things will be fine.
Here, here. Let's end it right there. I love that response. Professor, is there anything that you'd love to plug? Where can people check you out?
Yeah, well, you can actually check me out on X, the Food Professor. Of course, you can search that handle, and of course, we have the Food Professor podcast with my co-host Michael LeBlanc. It's the top management Canadian-produced podcast. So check it out, the Food Professor podcast. It's a weekly program.
And let me just say, like, folks, I love following the Food Professor on X. I follow the Food Professor on X, right? We interact a little bit there. Folks, if you follow me, if you like my work, well, I love the Food Professor's work. Great resource. Please follow him on X. With that being said, Professor, thanks for coming on the show today. This was a lot of fun.
Well, thank you, and happy Thanksgiving to you and to your listeners.
Oh, yeah. Happy Thanksgiving. Well, there you have it, folks. We just had the Food Professor on the show. Governments, stay out of the way, right? As much as possible. Get out of the way. That's what we want. And folks, stay with us, because up next on the show, we've got clips with Kris Sims coming on the show to break down the big taxpayer stories of the week. Stay tuned. Yeah, we've got Kris Sims on the show to go over the big taxpayer news stories of the week. Simmer, are you ready for clips with Kris?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Kris, we're going to do something a little bit different today for today's show. Instead of going over a bunch of the big taxpayer news of the week, I want to really dive into one topic. Look, I think this is really important. You're the best person in the country to come on the show and talk about it. And the issue I want to talk about is the Alberta teachers' strike. So, Kris, what's going on in Alberta?
Oh, Franco, it's a mess. So there's like 700,000 students who go to government schools here in Alberta. They're out. They're locked out. That's because more than 50,000 school teachers are out on strike. It's the first time in 23 years, actually, that the Alberta teachers have actually hit the picket line. That means that there's kids who are locked out of school right now whose parents never went through this stuff. So it's a huge fight right now between Alberta Premier Danielle Smith and a huge chunk of this teachers union.
Okay, we're going to get into some of the nuts and bolts in a second, but before we do, Kris, why do you think all Canadian taxpayers should be looking at what's going on here, and why all Canadians should be concerned?
Yeah, big time. So if you're sitting there thinking, oh, well, I don't live in Alberta, this doesn't apply to me. No. Okay, government unions, they chat more than ladies in a hair salon, okay? They get together all the time. They compare notes, okay? And they actually do take notes from each other. And if it's happening here in Alberta, which is a big, powerful province in Canada, sure enough, it's eventually going to happen in your neck of the woods. So it's really important to stay on top of this stuff, because all the other government teachers unions are taking notes right now.
Yeah, and let me just break it down even more, right? So you have this one union within the Alberta government, essentially, right, being like, we want more money, right? Well, then another Alberta government union will be like, well, they got more money. Where's our money? And then you have the municipalities, right? Those municipal bureaucrat unions saying, well, they're getting more money from Alberta taxpayers. Where's more money for us? From Calgary taxpayers. And then you have bureaucrats in other provinces that'll look at this and be like, well, they're all getting paid more. Where's our extra taxpayer cash? Okay. And then even the federal government union bosses will be pointing to all the provinces, all the municipalities, and be like, where's our slice of the taxpayer pie, right? That's how this stuff works, folks. And that's why this fight is so important. So, Kris, let's get into the nuts and bolts of what's going on. So, what was on the table, and what did the teachers and their union bosses say no to?
This is the crazy part, Franco, is because one would think that because the teachers rejected this, that they weren't being offered any more money. That's not true. So the government says they were offering 12% pay increases for Alberta teachers over the next 4 years. So that's 3% per year. On top of that, they were offering to hire 3,000 new teachers plus 1,500 new classroom assistants. Now, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, she came out guns a-blazing on this. She said, whoa, why on earth are you guys rejecting this thing? She says it would have made Alberta teachers the highest paid teachers in all of Western Canada. To give you an idea, like we've got some numbers here. And again, this is this, if you don't mind, this is the dead deal. Okay, this is rejected.
Yeah, break down the numbers for us. Let's see what they would have made right in that dead deal.
Okay, this is the dead deal. So as of September 1st, 2027, if they'd accepted this new deal, say you're a brand new teacher, fresh as a daisy, straight out of college, you'd start at $71,000 a year. Plus benefits.
Wait, hold on. Sorry, starting $71,000 a year?
Starting at $71,000 a year. Starting. And I got to stress this, we're in Alberta, man. Like, you're signing on with a brand new job at $71,000 a year with crazy job security. Like, basically, teachers have jobs for life if they choose to stay in them, plus benefits, plus all the vacation time, plus all the holidays. Give her.
Chris, hold on. I know you're gonna go into, like, you're gonna make this point. I'll just make it right now, because I interrupted. But Alberta, relatively low taxes, right? Low cost of living. And 71,000 starting. The average Canadian worker, the salary for the average Canadian worker is about $70,000 a year.
That's right. And we're talking about, like, that's the average. That includes, like, technical space rocket scientists, engineers, plus other people. That's how they get to that. So here, teachers would be starting at 71. And then, okay, let's say you got 5 years on the job, okay? In fact, let's just make it more fun. 7 years. 7-year itch. 7 years on the job, you've got a basic college degree, more than $100,000 a year. By the time you hit 9 years, so less than a decade on the job, $110,611 a year. They said no to this. So honestly, Franco, this is what actually has me scratching my head that I can't get right now. Because we're hearing people all through the media from the teachers saying, well, it's not about the money. All right, just a sec. So you're offered a deal that would have made you, reportedly, the highest paid teachers in all of Western Canada, less than a decade on the job, and you're getting more than $110,000 a year, plus all the benefits, plus all the time off that teachers do get. And again, we know some teachers really love their students and they work hard. We get that.
Totally.
Okay? We're not saying they shouldn't be paid, but this is a very generous pay scale, is what we're saying. So this is the thing. 89.5% of the rank and file voted against this thing. So this is where you could see the frustration on Smith's face. She's like, what? So this is where a lot of people are saying, what is going on? So 2 things. 1, if it's not about the money, you better say what it's about real fast. Okay? And 2, I'm hearing a lot of politics around this stuff. A lot. NDP leader Naheed Nenshi just finished saying, well, Danielle Smith provoked this fight with teachers. Since 2022, education funding, just K-12, has increased by 27%. So it ain't the money. What's going on?
Yeah, and if it ain't about the money, look, I have a feeling it's about the money, right? Show me the money. Come on. Okay. Look, if something smells fishy, it's usually fish, right? That's all I'm going to say. And if it ain't about the money, well, are the union bosses or whatever we call them out there, are they proposing a pay cut, a pay freeze? I highly doubt it. I have a good feeling some of it is about the money. Okay, Kris, so now you told us what was on the table. Do we have any idea of what they're pushing for now?
Great question. So as of right this moment, as of we're recording this, we've got teachers literally out on the picket lines. They had a big protest over the weekend where a bunch of people wore red, and that was a big crowd. Just saying it, man.
Yeah,
that
I
was
saw
a
photos.
that was a big crowd at the Edmonton legislature, man. And there was a bunch of people doing the whole barber shave thing, honk, blah, 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 here even in town. So this could go on for a while. But this is where I'm wondering how long it's going to go on for, because we can see that Smith is digging her heels in, man. Like, she's not happy to have this rejected like this. We're also hearing the CBC is reporting, Franco, that teachers aren't getting strike pay. I found that very interesting. And again, this is my reporting. This is the CBC reporting that the rank and file teachers who are out there right now on the picket lines aren't getting strike pay. And the way that Premier Smith is looking right now with the language we're seeing, they better go buy some snow boots because they could be out there for a while.
Okay, so you say they might be out there for a while. You mentioned all the kids now that aren't able to go to the government school. So I guess the obvious question is like, well, what happens next, right? What is the Alberta government, how has the Alberta government responded? And what do you make of that response?
Yeah, this was actually the one, usually when we're fighting the government, we're usually frustrated with them all the time. Credit where it's due, they came out with this package real fast, and I'm happy to see it. So within 12 hours of that union saying no by 89.5% to that big pay increase and really good job security, frankly, the Smith government came out and said, okay, parents, if you have students under the age of 12 and they are now not able to go to school due to strike, you will get $30 per kid per day for the duration of the strike. So depending, doesn't matter how many kids you got, if they're under 12, $30 per day. And that's of course to help with these parents who are now scrambling to try to find safe childcare for their kids because they're taxpayers.
Yeah.
Franco, these parents have been paying through their taxes for schools to be open and teachers to be at work. If the schools are closed and teachers are refusing to work, they deserve to have a refund given to those parents. So we're really happy to see Smith come out with this right away. On top of that, Franco, I found this interesting. For parents who are able to try to work from home or cobble together something for their kids' learning, they even posted a link on the Alberta government website, how to keep pace with the curriculum, week by week by week, to try to help your kid.
Yeah, you're so right in the one sense where you said there are a lot of really good teachers out there.
Yep.
And I know firsthand that there's a lot of them who truly care about their students, right? And I would assume that's why many do go into that profession. And I'm just going to make a statement out here, but I honestly believe it applies to every single government bureaucrat, any single employee who's paid for by the taxpayer, right? If you don't want to go to work, then taxpayers should get their money back.
Yep.
Right? That's the whole thing, especially when you just look at government and things like government education, government healthcare, while not completely monopolized, it's essentially a monopolized service or a quasi-monopolized service, right? So like if taxpayers are paying for this, especially parents who have jobs, right? Who have to worry about what their kids are doing all day. Well, if you're not going to go to work, then taxpayers should get their money back.
Can I just say as well, I'm a parent. My husband and I have 2 kids who are in school, or they're not in school. They're home today because the strike. I've been getting some emails and letters, and I will say that I had some great teachers growing up. One of them was my high school history teacher who watches our show. Big fan. Another one was One in Hope that taught both my kids. Even he was underestimating how much Alberta teachers were being paid. So this was a teacher back in BC who totally means well. He's one of those guys that stays super late, coaches all the stuff, does his thing. He didn't realize how much Alberta teachers were already being paid, Franco. And what the deal was, they rejected. So when I say there are some very good and important teachers in my life, I mean it. Okay? But, and this but is so big it should star in a 90s rap video. If it's not about the money, you have to tell the premier, okay? Being coy, okay? Saying it's complexity or something like that, or some of the language I'm seeing that's being reported from, different circles within the Alberta Teachers Union, fighting against Danielle Smith, the premier, on really political topics.
Mm-hmm.
Just some free advice to those teachers who are rank and file, that is not going to fly with parents. Like, not one bit. So y'all got to figure out your communications real fast, and you got to be able to figure out a deal that does not cost Alberta taxpayers more money. Because this is the last thing I'll point out on this one element, Franco, is that we would have told Alberta Premier Danielle Smith that this offer was too much.
Yeah.
We would have said this is too expensive because we're out of money. We're on track to have a debt of $84.3 billion this year. Every nickel that they offer these teachers again will be borrowed money plus interest. The students who are locked out right now are going to be paying this bill in the future.
Yeah, and I mean, look, if you really care about government services, there's one thing you have to care the most about, and it's not political ideology. Nope, it's interest charges on the debt.
That's right.
Okay, Kris, I got two more questions, okay? I know
Okay.
you're busy with this the strike going on. I know you got the kids running around the house probably driving you nuts right now. No, they're great kids. Okay, so two more questions. The first is, where do you see this all going?
Great question. So there's a few mechanisms that Smith has under her control. She hasn't quite indicated what she's going to do. I can see that she's digging her heels in, though. Anybody who went and watched that press conference that she gave when she announced how much they just rejected, looks like she's digging her heels in. So she could pull the Margaret Thatcher card and just wait them out. And I know that she's a huge fan of Margaret Thatcher, so that could happen. We could be waiting around here till November. Snow is flying. Things are getting real cold here in Alberta. We also have the ability, the government has the ability, rather, to impose back to work legislation if they wanted to. And in those situations, then, I forget how long it is. I think it's within 72 hours or something. The union has to go back to work, but then all the other extras will be canceled. So all the stuff like school plays, Christmas concerts, coaching the basketball team, all that stuff that a lot of kids really count on at school to give them that cultural environment, that would be off the table in that situation. So those two things could happen is where I'm seeing this right now. The last I heard, and this was just a second ago, is that there are some other teachers doing exploratory talks with the government right now, but it doesn't sound official.
Okay, well that's good to know. I'm glad you broke that down for us. So,
Yeah.
last question, and I want us to be action oriented, right? Now we see these strike threats happening all the time, right? Or in this case, actually going on strike. Now, government union bosses striking, it's not new, but it seems like we're really experiencing a lot of them these days, right? A lot, like there's a massive one in Ottawa, but back in 2023, there's so many different talks of strikes and strikes happening, I would say in this modern era. And, I'm always thinking like the government union bosses try to use essentially their monopoly on services or their quasi monopoly on services as a massive advantage over taxpayers, right? And they're doing it right now in Alberta at the beginning of a school year, right? So Kris, like, how can taxpayers take action? How can people who just push back? Because we're seeing this happen all the time.
That's a great question. So a few things. One, your local MLA right now, I promise you, is getting inundated with emails from the teachers union rank and file. Okay. They probably have an automated setup of, hey, fill the inbox. If you are listening to this right now and you're thinking, yeah, actually starting at $71,000 a year with a 4-year degree in teachers college for basically a job for life, that sounds pretty good. Or less than 10 years experience and you're making $110,000 starting in 2027 to teach grade 7 social studies, 110, that's pretty good.
Salary. Lots of time off.
This is it, okay? If you're sitting there, especially, I'm sorry, if you've been affected by the downturn in the energy sector and stuff, I'm sorry. If you're sitting there listening to that, wincing, going, really? You guys rejected that? Send an email to your MLA. Send an email to your MLA and say, don't you back down. Dig in. Make sure you're not spending more money. Now, if you've got to come up with creative solutions, straight up, if you figure out a way to have more classroom helpers in there, okay, for the kids that have different needs, they were also hearing that from teachers, but you're not increasing the spending, okay? You're going to have to keep the money offer the same and keep the spending down, okay? Tell them that. Send that email right now to your MLA and you tell them that, hey man, cupboard's bare. As a taxpayer, I can't afford to pay more. So go figure this out. Also, I'm going to be speaking with Paige McPherson, who you know very well with the Fraser Institute. All right. Later on this week, she is the guru on school choice.
Yeah.
We could be headed more in that direction because here in the province of Alberta, for folks who are watching outside of Alberta, we have charter schools in Alberta. Essentially, the government funding follows the kid in Alberta. Depending on where you go, which school, it doesn't matter. The funding follows you. So some more school choice options might be what's in our future.
Let's crack open that quasi-government monopoly. Yeah,
Yep.
100%. I mean, if you're going to fund it, let the funding follow the kids, right?
That's right.
That's what it's all about. I think that's a good solution. Well, hey, Kris Sims. I love clips with Kris, right? This
Me
is
too.
so good. You know, and sorry, I kind of threw this at you today. I know we were going to talk about all these different news articles, and I'm like, you know what, Kris? We're the ones doing the show. I want to talk about what's going on in Alberta. So, Kris, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Hope my kids didn't make too much noise on the ceiling running around making toast right now.
No, you're good, Kris. And you know, for anyone out there watching, I might need a new couch to sleep on after this thing airs. But hey, Kris, that was a
We love you, teachers. Yeah.
oh, that was a fun conversation. And hey, folks, I hope you're enjoying this little format that we have going on here, the Franco Terrazzano Show. I'm reading all your comments. And, you know, last week I asked you guys, because I'm struggling, what's the dumbest thing the government's doing? Is it the gun ban and confiscation scheme, or is it the ban on the sale of new gas and diesel vehicles by 2035? I just can't figure it out. So I asked you to put it in the comments below. And some of my favorite comments were like, Franco, it's both. And that's the only reasonable answer, right? You're right. It is both. They're both super dumb, and I can't figure out which one's more dumb. And at least we're all in this together, right, folks? None of us can figure out what's more dumb. So I have another question for you guys today. Leave it in the comments below. And I just want to know, like, what evergreen topics do you want us to dive into, right? Do you want us to talk about how bad a universal basic income would be? How bad a wealth tax would be, what's going on with home equity taxes. You know, we all know that the Trudeau government had been flirting with home equity taxes for quite some time, including using your tax dollars to fund a report recommending a form of home equity tax. So, hey, what do you want us to talk about? Let us know in the comments below. Well, folks, I'm Franco Terrazzano. I'm going to keep fighting back against those entitled politicians and bureaucrats. And I hope you keep fighting with us. Until next time.